So this idea may or may not work, but it is 100% reversible. So I'm okay with trying it. Now, in the water heater industry, when it has anything to do with drafting, there's a draft diverter. And what that allows is continuous draft up the tube without affecting much going on within the water heater. And so since I have this raised platform, I have a Resner radiant heat furnace, overhead furnace, that I plan to vent through. And I have cut a little bit of a oversized 4-inch hole, but my first connection is a flange, so I'll be able to seal on this and bolt it down. So I do believe what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a 3-inch hole into the tank. I must have had a phone call because I quit recording and I also realized I've been chopping my head off. So I have this 2-foot or so piece of 3-inch tubing, and I plan to cut a hole into the tank that's 3 inches. And what that's going to allow me to do is peen this over, slide it through, and weld it from the inside. It's going to allow the room air to draft along with any forced air to draft. And then with a 4-inch tube, this is the size of that Resner pipe, over this, I should have fresh air coming up and kind of cooling this first 2 feet. So that way it's not dangerous to the touch for maybe little people that might be around here. I agree, this is quite hillbilly of me, but I have this here wooden cart, and it's going to be my welding creeper for this moment while I tack this in place and hopefully not burn my face off. Oh, I think I need a confined space permit for my own garage. This ain't working. Maybe I'm just physically too large to get in that hole upside down. Probably just short circuited or something, and I arced, and I'm feeding wire into the welder now. Dang it. Well, it is not attractive at all, but I think I got the job done. If I can look on the other side and not see any light from my work light, I'll be good to go. I think I am set to cut those tabs off. I now have my air inlet pipe stubbed in, and I'll have to figure out a way to mount this tube to this fan. It's a little guy, but it moves like 110 CFM, maybe 120 is what it's rated for, and it's got a variable controller here. So now our burner assembly here is welded into the tank, okay? Our air inlet is coming down the back of the tank, turning 90 degrees, coming in through here and blowing out here. This burner pot will sit on those threaded rods. Washers are welded into the bottom of this along with a plate of steel and this little flange here. This diffuser will sit here on top of the burner and hopefully make the air inside this pot swirl. So air's coming up through here and diffusing out to this ring. And then there will be these 3 race car rotors stacked up here. And then this lid. Now, if I can imagine, this whole burner assembly right here should be the coolest part of the burner, because all of the heat is being directed out. It hits this diffuser cap as the air's coming up and has to blow out. So then that would make the flames circle in this direction and run out of these rotor stacks here. I am brainstorming, and sometimes talking to myself is the best way for my head to understand. And so, this is my thought on oil delivery. I still want to have tubes coming through this tank somewhere to help diffuse heat. I do believe that I want to have them at an angle, so that way it can help set a draft and blow heat away. I now, with this air inlet tube in the back of the tank, have to be mindful of the fact that straight back of the tank is kind of real estate that is spoken for by that tube. So I'm thinking the oil delivery might want to also be on that back line. So if we have an oil tube coming in somewhere, I think if I cut a hole here, and maybe smaller is better to begin with, and maybe even build some type of a cone to make oil splash. I think oil can drip in here with or without this in place. I have also decided that I want to use little chunks of wood to start the fire, get the fire burning, and then introduce oil. That works great in my wood boiler, so why not have it here as well? So if I make this oil drip, say this high, and on a constant stream, I do believe that the fire will be everywhere but here, within reason. I also believe if this oil is falling, it will help to splash and diffuse and dissipate and atomize and all those fancy words, and kind of dance on the hot metal below. Which tells me, see, here we are talking to myself and brainstorming. I want to keep this flat. I want this to dance. If this gets red hot enough to glow, I want the oil to be bouncing around on here and going wherever it wants. I'm going to keep that flat for now. I think if I can introduce a steel tube here from the back of the tank somewhere, that will be the winner. So if that oil tube gets coked up and plugged, I can use air pressure on the back side of it to blow it out. So I'm trying to be mindful of my maintenance. I'm also trying to be mindful of premier operation, and I do believe that's going to be a big help. So I'm going to get to work finding some materials to add in here, and maybe even brace that tube somewhere so that way it can't really move from center. So right there is that tube. I've tacked it into place right here. And now it's time to see if I can actually take this assembly apart with it in place. And I still don't know if this is all going to clear once the door is in place. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yeehaw! Well, I've got that supported with just a scrap piece of tab that I had. I've got that welded shut, and I have it supported very well in the back. Maybe a little crooked, but that's okay. Well, I stacked up some steel, and that's a machine jack, and I welded the box into the tank. That came out pretty okay. Now I suppose it's probably a little bit too late, but as long as I can assemble that burner with this door in place, I think that we are pretty much ready to bolt this down and then have a test fire. I don't exactly know how high that is, but with the stack up of this bad boy, I will have the ability to have a 6-inch rise from this point to any sidewall, and I'll also have a minimum of 12 inches of air gap at the highest point of this chimney pipe. So I'm getting close to a real test fire. So I drilled through this flange and I bolted onto the tank. I now have a stack that's about, I don't know, a little over 8 feet off the ground total. I do believe that I'm gonna end up having to weld those holes shut, and this will be just a completely sealed exhaust, but I want to give it the benefit of the doubt. I kind of like the idea of cooling this first 2 feet of stack, but then on the other hand, I think that it's going to defeat the purpose of the entire radiant heat system if I go with 16 foot or 32 foot of vent pipe. So if I can keep the heat in there longer, it might work out even better. I don't know for sure. There's one way to find out. I'm not sure if I've pointed out all this stuff here. I'm gonna set my glove down. But I used to have a full pressure off of the tank tap. I used to have a regulator. And then I would have, I think this was considered a 3/8 inch, and this was a 1/2 inch quick disconnect. Because at the tool and die shop I worked at, all of my air fittings were big, high volume. And at home, all of my tools were small, lower volume. But once in a while, I would bring home some of my tool and die tools to use at home for whatever reason. So I just had both options available. Point being here, all of this plans to stay if it doesn't get in the way, if it ends up working out where I don't melt it to pieces. I just like this as far as, you know, the things that I used to do to get by with what I needed. And this is just kind of a cool reminder of where this tank came from, maybe where I came from. I'm willing to bet some of that moss is probably not going to make the trip.